Hope you all enjoyed last evening. May I invite Dr. Riaz Maplakandi and Dr. Veena Daga for the welcome address. Over to you, Dr. Riaz.
Thank you very much, Monsoon. Good morning. Namaskar. Welcome to everybody again. We had fantastic 2 days. We are into the third day. I often say it's something when you learn. It's the education day. So belt your buckles up and be ready for the session. We have a wonderful speaker group. Who have come from far and near to help us out with the program. We have deliberately decided the programs and designed in such a way that it's going to suit every section of the doctors as well as the nurses. So we have a session on GP training. We have a session on CSER for these higher specialist trainees. And we also have a session for portfolio for the more junior doctors, and in fact, everybody. And also we have a session for nurses. That's the first part. Then the second session will be parallel workshops in which we have sessions around research and funding and publications. And the last parallel workshop would be more related to generic things you need to know about dealing with mindfulness and the sort. However, we'll start off the session with training, how training has changed in COVID times. So I believe that's the morning session, and I hope all of you will have a great time. We know BAPIO has been in the forefront of training and education over the last many, many years. And in fact, that's how BAPIO was formed, Training and Education and Career Support, when it's founded in 1996. And we see the various things they have done for us, doctors and all the medical fraternity in general over the years. Successfully, they have actually made it formalized in 2016 through a BAPIO Training Academy. And I have the pleasure of inviting the Director of Medical Education of BAPIO Training Academy, Dr. Veena Daga. Most of you may be familiar with her. She has done some fantastic work with the BAPIO Central team, Professor Parasingal and others. And she will briefly talk to us about what BAPIO Training Academy would be doing. Once again, I welcome you all, and I thank you for attending. Over to you, Veena.
Many thanks, Riaz.
Once again, I welcome you all, and I thank you for attending. Over to you, Veena.
Many thanks, Riaz. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome for day 3. First of all, I would really like to say thanks for everyone to joining us, especially on Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. I hope you all had your coffee today. And let's start. We're talking about BAPIO Training Academy. It's our educational and training day today. Can I have slides, please? So, BAPIO Training Academy, we launched in 2015. And following that, we have various activities ongoing. Our main objective of BAPIO Training Academy to promote excellence in clinical education. And instead of saying BAPIO Training Academy, we start calling it a BTA, which is one of the sub-arm of BAPIO. We have an excellent team, and as our team involve all the executive members from BAPIO. Can I have next slide, please? So our team have Chairman Dr. Mehta, and in guidance with the Prof. Singhal as well. As a team, we say we are doers. So we not only critique and talk, but we believe in put plan in action, and we do it. So currently, there are few activities going on. So current activities, as I explained briefly yesterday as well, we're doing PLEB courses, loads of webinars to continue education platforms, especially in this COVID area. Starting from 2021, we got loads of exciting training events coming up, hoping to have more mentors, more leaders, and research in our community. So keep an update on our BTA website. Next slide, please. In addition of UK training, we have something different. So as a BTA, we're also looking to commit a bridge in between India, not only India, but other developing countries and UK. And we have launched exciting programs. It's called 2+2 and 3+3 program. Next slide, please. So in 2+2, when they had 2 years training in India, and their training again follow the curriculum of the UK. They come, do the 2 years training in UK and have a completed MRCP and loads of other skills they will learn, which they can hop and go and practice back in their own countries and use it. Next slide, please. You may have heard about teleheal, which we discussed in yesterday's program. So there are lots of exciting events going on. And I really will be very grateful if you would like to join our exciting team. Any small contribution will help to promote education, to help someone's life. So there's a team here. If you want to get in touch, please either email myself or feel free to give a call. Follow us on Twitter. Hoping to see lots of you in our academy. Okay, I'm hand over to Masoon now. Thanks very much.
Masoon, could you unmute your mic, please?
Sorry. Thank you, everyone. We may now move on to session 1 for the day. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I would like to welcome you to the first session of our third day of the conference. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Mohsin Samman. He's the clinical lead of acute medicine and critical care in Northampton General Hospital. He's also the RCP tutor and who's also interestingly doing new virtual reality-based training methodologies in Northampton. So I'll kindly welcome you to the stage, sir.
Thank you, Sunil. And without further ado, welcome to the session on training and how it has changed in COVID times. I'm going to start off quickly with my first speaker, who is Dr. Minal Bakai. Dr. Bakai is a clinical director of Digital First in primary care at NHS England. She's a practicing GP and she's an advisor at the NICE panels. She's going to be doing her first talk on new training initiatives. So, Dr. Bakai, over to you.
Thank you, Mohsin, and thanks very much for inviting me today. So I just want to start off by giving you an overview of the transformation that's happened in primary care, particularly from a digital perspective in response to COVID. So general practice has transformed in a remarkable way to meet the challenges of COVID and the needs of our patients. So if we could move to the first slide, please. The move to a triage-first approach, remote consultations, remote monitoring, and enabling remote working are all very large and very significant changes to general practice ways of working. And while these moves were underway prior to the pandemic, the pace of change forced by COVID has meant adoption and acceptance has been hugely accelerated. If we could move to the next slide, please. Just to put the scale of change into context, pre-COVID, only 3% of general practices had a video consultation solution. We now have video consultation solutions available in over 99% of practices. And likewise, pre-COVID, only about 30% of practices had an online consultation system. These are now available in over 90% of general practices, with use steadily increasing. We're seeing about 500,000 online consultation requests submitted by patients per week, circa about 1% pre-COVID of total consultations. So in less than 2 months, the general practice workforce has had to adapt to remote consultations being a significant part of their clinical day, and also using new platforms such as MS Teams, Zoom, and others to facilitate multidisciplinary team and system communication. And it's been great to hear how quickly and confidently my colleagues have adapted, many finding it easier than they thought it would be. 88% of GPs have said that they'd like to keep more remote consulting outside of a pandemic situation, recognising clearly that although there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all and multimodal access should always be available, their contribution to managing demand for services and improving access to healthcare professionals. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So what have we learned so far? So we're carrying out multiple large national evaluations of digital primary care during the pandemic. And one part of this is a survey to general practice, and interim findings from that survey show that there's been a significant improvement in practice innovation readiness and confidence in using digital platforms over this time period, with over 85% of GPs reporting that they feel confident in using their online consultation systems, over 80% feeling confident in choosing the right approach for responding to patients who submit an online request, or assessing a patient using video consultation, assess and develop a management plan with the patient, the need for a physical examination, and then concerns about the patient's capacity, privacy, or safeguarding. We've also clearly seen the value of telephone consulting. So the GP appointment data, while imperfect, suggests that about 10 million appointments in general practice in September were by telephone. Compare this with 51,000 video consultations recorded for the same time period from the main video consultation supplier in primary care. And so what that highlights is that in most instances, the telephone or SMS messaging, the MDT, this has been frequently used for our patients with diabetes, and some practices are currently planning on using this approach to provide COVID vaccination information and advice too. Other ways that we've been using digital has been to support our care home ward rounds, but here it's not just the digital consultation, but also we've been using digital equipment. So in my practice, we use a digital stethoscope with our care home. So a member of the care home staff places the stethoscope on the patient. When we've asked practices what do they need, key areas that they've identified for further support and training have been including the whole team, so including locums in training and support in using online and video consultation systems, upskilling their admin staff, so it's not just about clinical training, having technical support available, but also more broadly thinking about change management, analytics, support with communication. Videos have been produced to support patients. A public campaign, Health at Home, has been launched, again, to provide some of that education, and example scripts developed for practices to pick up and adapt. Other groups, such as the Good Things Foundation, working with us nationally, have developed a training platform to train digital champions or facilitators, so that we can be more inclusive. It's freely accessible, and we're training our social prescribers and health coaches to support patients with using these digital methods. So training on computer and internet access and use, effective search skills, how to interpret online information. And this has really helped support that increased self-management approach. And also digital hubs have been set up to support patients in the community, in their own community setting, to be able to access devices and data. We're also working with underrepresented groups to improve the experience and usability and accessibility of the tools so that they are more intuitive and they do better meet patient needs. And this work also includes a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the patient context, so that information and explanation can become more tailored. Pandemic. Access to professional development and training is also really important. We've got really positive examples of access to MDT training that was made easier because it was remote, because participants could dial in, they could avoid travelling. But also training for GP registrars has become more challenging, in particular consistent access to formal and informal clinical supervision, and identifying issues therefore becomes more complex. And it's harder to pick up blind spots and intervene in the moment, particularly, again, if you don't have that trust and relationship there. The pandemic has also had an impact on the ability for that informal discussion between trainer and trainee, so in coffee breaks, corridor conversations, discussing grey dilemmas, which might not warrant a formal phone call. And therefore, some issues might be under the radar, and so that tolerance of risk may need to be recalibrated by the supervisor. The pandemic is...
Thank you, Minal. It was a wonderful and insightful talk to hear from you. The next speaker is Dr. Kapasi. Dr. Tariq Kapasi is currently a managing partner at Willowbrook Surgery. He's also an associate at Glen. Talk to hear from you. The next speaker is Dr. Kapasi. Dr. Tariq Kapasi is currently a managing partner.
So through this very short talk, I'm just going to talk about the challenge between providing patient care and delivering medical education. because that is a challenge. And there is some ethical sort of principles which we must consider when looking at the two, because when you've only got a short few minutes in the day, the two can very much battle against each other. Next slide, please. So if we look at the General Medical Council's requirements, the care of our patients should be our first concern. And I think actually as a group of professionals in healthcare, we've managed the COVID-19 outbreak and put that first before medical education. I think the key thing is, though, is that that doesn't stop the training opportunities that have arisen as a result. Health Education England seems to think that most trainees have progressed into the next stage of training and it's not really caused a problem. But we can see that if there is a further impact on training through a second wave or a third wave, this will lead to a cumulative effect and it could lead to delayed progression for some trainees. Next slide, please. Health Education England, I think, have been very, very good in trying to orchestrate the training system through this pandemic. And at the moment, they're not changing trainees from one rotation to another. Planned rotations are going ahead. There is redeployment of trainees, but that's only very specific circumstances. Formal education has continued. Specific circumstances. Formal education has continued. We're maximizing opportunity for practice. The other sort of element to this is that we've got more trainers come on board because more of them are available in a digital platform. You're not confined necessarily by geographical location. And that means that you have more trainers come on board, you have more feedback and a more comprehensive appraisal which can be performed as a result of that. So that leads So that leads to an evolution of the multi-source feedback process. Next slide, please. So that leads to an evolution of the multi-source feedback process. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Final thoughts. Remember, I think, we all know patient care is the primary focus, but let's not forget that medical education is very important. And let's celebrate the adaptability of the medical workforce. And with compassionate leaders like Mohsin around, I think we're in good hands. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you for that, Tariq. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post only one question to both of you, and that will conclude the session once you've answered it. This is from Prof. Lakhani, and it goes, how important do you think the leadership training and skills are in teaching and training? Do you feel we do enough? And what can we do to develop future leaders with positive mind?
It's about being visible and supporting people both personally and professionally. So again, I would agree. Trainees should just go out and bite the bullet. And their trainers should support them in doing so.
Thank you for those responses. It was a wonderful session. Thank you, Minal and Tariq. And thank you, Sunil and Chitra, for your help as facilitators. We are going to conclude now. There are going to be parallel sessions running as soon as this session ends. And please choose the session you want to go to and enjoy. Thank you. Thank you all.
I just want to reinforce Dr. Samman. So I would like all the delegates to kindly use a stage icon to choose their stage according to their priority. So we'll conclude the session. Thank you.
Session you are going.
And I can provide responses that can be shared with the group. So don't worry if we don't get to your question. But without further ado, we'll crack on with the slides, please. Okay, I'm just waiting for those to come up in front of me. Fabulous, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an overview of what my team do at the GMC, I've listed what our functions are as set out on this slide. Obviously, CSER is one of the applications for entry onto the specialist register. We do have a GP equivalent called SEGPA, but that's a much smaller proportion of those equivalence applications that we process. In terms of the applications, we process around 6,500 to 7,000 CCT applications a year. Obviously not what we're here to talk about, but that just gives you an idea of the scale in comparison to the equivalence route that we are going to talk about. So we do process around 900 CSER and SEGPRA applications each year, and whilst that's a considerably smaller number than CCT, my team actually supports the UK CCT curriculum. So we provide a lot of guidance, and again I'll talk to you about the guidance that we provide for each specialty in this presentation, but we provide a lot of guidance that reflects the types of evidence that you need to provide to demonstrate the competencies that are set out in the CCT curriculum. But this is a competency-based process, so as I said, we're looking for equivalence to those competencies, and that can be via a variety of different types of evidence. So we're not looking for exactly what a CCT trainee would do, we're looking to see that you've got the knowledge, skills, experience and competencies set out in that curriculum. And what CSER isn't, is it's not an assessment of competency in your current role. So you'll all be fantastic doctors in your current role, but what we need to see is that you demonstrate the breadth of competencies of your specialty curriculum. So it may be quite challenging in the first instance to do that. I don't think the 2019 one's come out just yet, or it might have just been published, but that's got a full breakdown of it, of the numbers of CSER applications we receive in every specialty and what the success rates are, and where those applications have come from. So I'd really recommend you go and have a look at that, and it's on our website, and I can always provide a link to it if you need. Next slide, please. Okay, so diving straight into kind of the actual application, there are some certain eligibility requirements set out in legislation that kind of governs this route to the register. So the first thing is you need to ensure that you are eligible to make an application, and to be eligible you need to have either a specialist medical. I'll talk you through that in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So there's some really important things to think about before you even start an application in our system and before you apply. The key thing is to read the curriculum for your specialty. You can find that on the GMC's website, the most up-to-date version, and also to read the specialty-specific guidance for your specialty. This is a document that we've drafted with the Royal College and faculty for your specialty. It's really detailed, and what it does is it sets out all the different types of evidence you need to provide to meet the requirements of your curriculum. It's got lots of links in there to forms and different types of tools that you can do, and there's also things set out there like messages from the SAC for your specialty data in there other than specific things we need like date of birth. But it's really important your evidence is anonymised or we can't accept it and we have to remove it from our system. Next slide, please. So in order to actually make an application for CSER, everything's done via GMC Online. So you can just log into your GMC account and follow by answering a couple of questions to get you through to this application, and then you'll make that online. As I said, we've got a portfolio application in the GMC Online system, and that allows you to upload evidence electronically. So authentication is only for a very minimal number of documents that you provide, such as registration with overseas regulators or qualifications. So that's where a solicitor or the awarding body signs and stamps and is often called a certified copy. Now, we would usually accept those in hard copy. At the moment, that's not possible just because of COVID-19, and we've got further guidance on that on our website at the moment. But the majority of your evidence would need to be verified, and this is by somebody in a medical supervisory position. So what they are confirming is that the document you're providing is a true and accurate record of that practice that you've done. We provide an electronic proforma that you complete and get signed by a verifier, and you provide that within the online application, and I'll talk you through that process in much more detail. But the important thing to mention is incorrect authentication and verification is the most common reason that we return evidence in the application, and it can really delay your application being progressed quickly and going to the college, so it's important you get it right. Next slide, please. So in terms of getting your evidence verified, there's a few steps in the process. So if you could just click next on the slide, please. So if you could just click next on the slide, please.
I stop sharing?
I think we have some technical issue.
No problem.
Archana, can
Yeah.
you see the slides that I was sharing? It did get stuck during the animation.
Okay, let me have a look.
I think it's on.
Perfect. Thank you. So once you've listed the evidence on that performer, and there's there's a link to the performer on our website, and again you can use the QR code in your packs to access that. What the verifier will do is look at that performer and look at the evidence that performer has listed. So you'd need to provide the evidence to the verifier to look through and check. They would go through and check that evidence, the evidence to the verifier to look through and check. They would go through and check that evidence, and then they would sign the performer electronically. So they can just sign and date that and provide their details for us to contact them as part of the application process. If you could click next in the slide, please. So then what you would do is you would submit those performers in a particular section in your application, and you provide that with the evidence you're providing, and we will check that information in that performer against the evidence you've submitted. If you click next in the slide, please. So all patient identifiable information must be removed, other than we do accept gender and date of birth, because that can be quite useful for the evaluators when they're looking at your portfolio of evidence to see the breadth of patients that you've seen. You also have to remove trainee details, who you've assessed, just because we don't need that information, so it wouldn't be right for us to hold that information. As I mentioned, gender and date of birth can remain. You need to consider how you'll anonymise your evidence when submitting this electronically. So if you've got redaction software, that's great, you can use that. If there's I think in some of your e-portfolio systems, you can remove that data and just not include it. Or you can do things like cover text with kind of marker in terms of in a Word document. What you have to be really careful of there is that you save that as a PDF, so it's not something that we can edit. If we can edit the redaction, we would have to return that to you. Next slide, please. So in terms of submitting evidence electronically, we introduced this a year or two ago, and it's been really successful. So basically, you upload evidence into various sections in the application, and what that allows our advisors to do is review that evidence on an individual basis based on each document you've uploaded, and they can share their advice and guidance to you directly in GMC Online. So they can tell you exactly which documents have been accepted, exactly which documents we haven't been able to accept, and the reason for that. So it gives you a really helpful itemised list and allows you to keep track of your application really clearly within the system. And there's different types of documents that can be uploaded. PDF is absolutely our preference because it's one of the easiest things for the evaluators to assess. Next slide, please. Follow the advice about how to present your evidence in the application. Next slide, please. And again, it's really important it's clear what the document is. We give guidance on the types of things that you can call your evidence, but we want to know exactly what the type of evidence is. It should be the same as what's on the proforma, and we've got naming conventions that you can use to do that, and you can put a date on it as well. Next slide, please. So the first stage of the application is after you've collated all your evidence electronically, you would submit that to us and pay the fee. We'll complete an initial assessment and check that you're eligible to make the application. And when we can accept hard copy evidence, we'd expect to receive that within a couple of weeks of you actually submitting your electronic evidence. At this point as well, we'll contact your verifiers and check they're still happy to act as a verifier for you. And we'll also request structured reports for your application. Next slide, please. These structured reports we obtain directly from referees which you nominate in your application. We ask you to nominate a minimum of 4 referees, but no more than 6. These are used to triangulate your primary evidence, and you should choose people who can comment on your recent experience from the last few years. two of whom work in your specialty so they can directly comment on that area. What's really important is that your first referee must be your current clinical or medical director, and whilst you may not work with them on a daily basis, they've got access to particular records that some of your other referees might not have. It's really good practice to speak to these people before the GMC emails them and asks them to complete a form, and there's a sample of the form on our website as well. Next slide, please. To take a quality assurance of that evaluation to make sure all the evidence has been considered, the review is appropriate, and if we've got any queries, we'll ask the Royal College about that within our 41-day period to review that. Once we're happy with the evaluation, we'll issue a decision based on the Royal College recommendation. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of success rates, we've seen the success rate continually improve over the last few years. A lot of that's around us working with Royal Colleges and applicants to improve our guidance, and also sharing knowledge about CSER via events such as this. Next slide, please. There are some common reasons why applications are unsuccessful, and largely that's around the primary evidence that's submitted and that not being sufficient. I've listed some of the reasons there, but in your specialty specific guidance, there'll be specialty specific reasons listed within that of why applications are unsuccessful. Their curriculum to reflect that. That's been slightly extended because of COVID-19, but in terms of CSER and the curriculum you're being assessed against, we're working on implementation date rather than approval date of curriculum. So what we'll be doing is we'll be running curriculum in a dual fashion, so you should be able to apply under the curriculum which is appropriate for you. So that might be the old curriculum if it's not been implemented yet. That might be the old curriculum or that might be the old curriculum, or it might be the new curriculum that's not been implemented yet. And all the curriculum will be reflected in the SSGs, as I've mentioned, so it's really important you have a look at that. And as I said, if you start an application in the system, it means we can let you know about what's going on with these curriculum. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to touch on COVID-19 this year, we've continued to run CSER applications throughout COVID-19, and thankfully we are able to accept electronic evidence. As I said, I'd be happy for questions to be sent to me and me to provide the answers out to the group following this.
Thank you very much, Faye, because we've been running over a bit. So if you can email those to us, that will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jaina, for the session. We can move on to the next session, please.
All right. So we're good to go now. Good morning, everyone. I'm sure all of you guys are excited for the session. It's going to be on funding and publications. We have a list of excellent speakers with amazing academic profiles joining us. So my name is Dr. Arshad. With my colleague, Dr. Archana, we're going to be facilitating the session. And we have the first speaker, Dr. Manish Parikh, who's an associate clinical professor in infectious diseases at Leicester. He's also a consultant at LRI. We have Professor Ivan Brown, who's the Director of Public Health at Leicester. And we have Professor Rishabh Prasad, who's a Professor of Digital Medicine at De Montfort University and is also a GP. Digital Medicine at De Montfort University and is also a GP. So over to you, Professor Parikh, and I'll be playing your slides as well.
Thanks very much. I'll wait for them to be shared and then we can. Great, I can see them. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming to the session. As Arshad said, I'm a clinical academic working on infectious diseases. Most of my work is has been on respiratory infections, predominantly tuberculosis, and also over the last 6 to 7 months, my group's been very deeply involved in COVID-19 around the issues in terms of ethnic minority health, and we've done a number of reports on that. And so today I'm going to speak to you really very briefly because I want to give a sort of overview on advice and tips on getting published. And I think these are really headline messages. And I think if anyone has any questions or queries, very happy for you to drop me an email afterwards. Could you have the next slide, please, Asha? So these are the areas I'm going to cover over the next probably no more than 5 to 7 minutes, really. I just want to talk about why we do aim to publish our work. What is the question? What is the research question? The importance of and tips on getting published, and then also for those of you who aren't aware, the publication process. Next slide, please. So why do we publish? Well, it's important to understand why we're doing it. Of course, many of us will think that we aim to publish because it's important for academic or clinical development, and of course it is, but also it's important to think that the bigger aim of this is a culmination of a defined piece of work. What we're trying to convey with all research studies or audits, whatever they are, is to convey important, novel, relevant information to those people to whom it matters. And that can be very highly variable. It could be your colleagues, other clinicians. It can be other clinical, academic, or non-clinical academic colleagues. Public health, very important, and Ivan will speak later about the interface between publishing and public health. And much of what we try and do is to change the health of people in our populations, but also the lay and general public. And you'll see over the last few months that almost every publication that comes out, particularly around screening or testing or vaccination, creates a huge amount of media interest. And so it's important to understand also that there is a message that is being given out to the lay and general public. Next slide, please, Sasha. So before you even start before you get to the point of publishing, it's really important to understand what you're trying to achieve. What is your research question? And when I was training, used to really kind of think, oh, well, this is a really simple thing, but actually it's quite difficult. It's really clear that you have to be really exact about what you're trying to understand. And so your question has to be very specific and it has to be very clear, but it also has to be something tangible and something that you can achieve. We all want to achieve, try and publish really huge, groundbreaking work, but actually most research is very incremental and just develops and builds on the work of others. And once you know your research question, I think everything else will flow from it. So what is the type of study design that you will use? What is the governance that underlies that study design? What are the specific methods that you may wish to use? How do you go on to report it? And what are the journals or fora within which you will report those or publish those findings? Next slide, please, Asha. So many of you have seen this sort of hierarchy of publications, and we start at the bottom really with expert opinion, and expert opinion doesn't really is counted as a very low quality of evidence. You will have seen a huge amount of expert opinion over the last few months, both in the published and scientific and non-scientific media. From that, you move up into things like case reports and case series, and often that's the first step that many, often junior clinicians will take into getting it published. And then we move into studies such as case control or cohort. And then we move into studies such as case control or cohort studies, moving into randomized control trials, which are often done through bigger pieces of work, and then systematic reviews, which are areas of work which bring together lots of different pieces of evidence to try and come up with a sort of summary of all the literature. And the actual methodologies that you use will be very variable. And I haven't got time today to speak about each of those individually, but understanding that the actual process, the actual governance and undertaking work for an expert opinion, which is basically writing down what you think, compared to a randomized control trial, varies quite significantly. Next slide, please. So governance, I just wanted to touch on, because I think it's really important, because one of the areas that we must remember, particularly around research and publications, is the importance of governance and approvals. And as I said, it will depend very much on the type of study you're trying to run. So a randomized control trial, there's a huge amount of governance, both ethical and also from the MHRA. if you're doing a ethical and also from the MHRA, if you're doing a case report, the actual governance will be much less, and audit even less. So I think whatever you're trying to achieve in terms of trying to develop or build on your publications, they often have other project ideas, they have other reviews that are underway. And from their point of view, they won't necessarily have the time to undertake them all, but they would be happy to perhaps help you devolve and work with them to kind of get that work undertaken. As I said, governance is really key. It's important that whatever data you collect, whether it's iterations, potentially with many iterations from comments from co-authors, and it's important that your co-authors do comment on it, and then you will decide with your authors what that target journal is, and you would submit. Now, once it goes into that submit button, you think, oh, well, that's great. But actually what happens then is that there's a handling editor who, in the vast majority of cases, will reject your paper manuscript. Particularly for higher impact journals, and an impact factor looks at how many times a paper is cited or how often journals are being cited, are quite difficult to publish in. But if you do get through that initial first review process by the handling editor, you would go on to have a peer review, and then if you manage to get through the first peer review, maybe asked to either revise and resubmit, or you might be rejected at that point. And then you go through iterations, further rounds of peer review, before you finally are accepted. And in general, my experience is that it usually takes, most people, when they submit, you get a first major revision, and you'll be asked to do quite a lot of rewriting, but you're generally, if you get to that point, will be accepted at the second point. Next slide, please, Arsha. So I just wanted to keep it brief, so I'm going to just summarize now. So I think my 2 or 3 things that I really want you to bear in mind: start small and build up. Don't try and create the most amazing study at the start. Start small. An audit can be published. Most audits will be publishable somewhere if they're done well and written up to a high level. Colleagues that have got experience, and each hospital, each university will have many of those. And it's a real process, as I've shown you on that flowchart. Starting the actual process of data collection through to acceptance can take some time, and you have to be pretty dogged to get to that point. But you should aim. I've seen so many people start audits or publications or research studies and just leave them because they lose interest. But try and complete what you and others have started. There's almost a sort of duty that once you've started something, you should be aiming to complete that piece of work. And then just the final thing is, particularly as an academic, we have to have quite a thick skin for the process of submission, not just publication. I think Professor Prasad will speak about funding, and I work on a sort of less than 10% success rates for most things. So that's all I wanted to say. Next slide, Arsha. I've just got my email. If anyone had any questions or comments, I think we're taking them at the end, but please do drop me a line. I'm happy to provide advice if anyone had any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parikh, for that excellent breakdown. I'm sure junior researchers like all of us have immensely benefited from the presentation. So we have Professor Brown, who's going to take you through further details of publication, and then
the end, but at the beginning. The role that I have with De Montfort University, I also work very closely with Leicester University, is around public health practice. It's about how does all of this work in practice. So the reason why this is quite essential is that any research group that you're working with starts to develop a reputation. And I think that all of our academics will tell you that success breeds success. If people have a confidence in the work that your team does, it is more likely that you're going to be asked to look at the interesting questions. It is more likely that you're going to be asked in terms of the research that you've done, how can we pilot that into practice? And if you've got a strong team around you that has an eye that is on practice, it helps your work to be more accepted and to be more recognized. So it is quite important. So one of the things that we've looked at, certainly within the city, we've worked very closely, as Manish has said, we've worked closely on things like decision makers are about what may come out of your paper are often not clinicians. The commissioners, the decision makers do not necessarily have a clinical background. So there is an interpretive piece that goes around how do we make this paper understandable, relevant, and compelling to those that actually need to put their money behind bringing around the change. That's a role that I take on with the colleagues, but I'm working with my colleagues, and I've worked with them for some time, for us to then have that conversation about how do we then structure what we do? How do we structure these findings into a way that people will understand it, and not only that people will understand it, and not only understand it, but be willing to put resource behind it. So that's another reason why it's really quite important. And I think it's not just people like myself or commissioners or anybody. Now the general public have a huge interest in research. They are often questioning what it says, wanting to have it in a manner that they can understand it and that they can share it with others and have confidence in it at the moment. So again, that's why it's also very important that you have quite a broad church of individuals that are helping in relation to putting research into practice. So one of the things that we just need to remember is that whilst we do these academic pieces of work, they must be rigorous. I'm going
to talk about secrets of funding rather than securing funding. Securing funding seems to be a bit of an art, which, as Manish alluded to, 10 to 15% success rate is pretty good. Funding for research, but also funding for your innovations and ideas, which is probably what I spend more of my time doing now. Next slide, please. So why am I talking? A good question. My career's in three parts. I have a service delivery component where I essentially run care at scale. Over the years, what kind of resource and funding you need? Equity is what we think about in startups and ventures, which is typically someone gives you money for a chunk of ownership of the company. It takes lots of different forms. It can be different share classes, growth shares, but fundamentally, so you typically want funding which will expect something in return for that funding. If you own the venture, such as startups, or you have equity in it, you have more options. And in a way, that determines who you're going to go for your funding. It's really important to find also for equity funding, it's really important to know what you want to do with it. So if this is, let's say you want to create some intellectual property, and you know the exit is going to be an IP sale, you can trade the equity. So there are always trade-offs. The higher the management cost, the lower the equity cost. The higher the equity cost, the lower the management cost. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're doing an NHS bid or a grant, you don't have any equity to trade, right? So you're going to have to service that debt. So if you want an NHS, so if you take Innovate is a great example. Innovate grants are industrial challenges for small and medium enterprises. The amount of management you have to do once you've secured the funding is tremendous. Applying for the funding can be hugely laborious. So every time you put an NHS bid together, you might well lose the will to live because this is such a hard and complex equity. Next slide, please. So I'll give you another real world problem. So this is more typical of NHS dramas and trying to secure funding. We decided to then, trying the NHS, we then decided to go to a small charity. Small charities are fantastic. They tend to have quick decision making. They tend to have modest levels of funding and the management's not too high. Next slide. We took it to the David Wilson Foundation, who sponsored us. They sponsored us about £50,000, and I'll show you the deck at the end. But how did we secure it? Next slide, please. Next slide. First thing, if you don't ask, you don't get. You do need to put it out there. You need a pitch deck. This is how I tend to secure most of my funding now. I tend not to apply for grants. It tends to be a pitch, and each pitch tends to be unique. And I'm not going to read it all out. We can share the slides at the end. But essentially, if you can define a problem, define what your solution is going to be and how you're going to do it, you can go some way into securing funding. So let me show you the slide deck we present to the David Wilson Foundation. Page of the press and media, professional colleges, informal networks, and get publications. And all of that was going to form why we wanted the money, because it wasn't just about serving our patients, which is important, it's about spreading the good news. Next slide, please. So a very clear roadmap. We need to get the money. Please give me the money. We'll get the terminals. We'll start very quickly, and we're going to publish really quickly. And that was part of the narrative, right? Because we're in the middle of, early March. We wanted to get the data out as quickly as possible to share learning. Next slide, please. We put the team. The team's really important. Having a positive, having a team with some experience, some game and some authenticity is really important, because ultimately you're trading on your reputation when you ask funding. Next slide, please. These are the financials we put forward, and we put forward a risk share model where we were going to put some time and money in, and we were asking for a significant result. 50 match funding model where people put all their costs in. We put all our time in for free. We put our geriatrician time in at a hugely discounted rate. I've just spotted a typo, which is slightly depressing. But, it was a very clear articulation on how much money we needed, what did we need it for. Next slide, please. We put a risk analysis together and saying, the product wouldn't happen or we'd have problems, because nobody wants a false narrative. They want to know that you've identified common challenges. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We got the funding, and Bertha, who's not here today, did the report, and this we submitted. And this we submitted about 9 weeks actually after we got the cash, and we paid off our debt. And in the meantime, we really helped look after our patients. And there's further research
from different ethnic minority groups, and so we are starting recruitment essentially now. In a number of ways, but one of the ways that we will be recruiting is that we are doing a number of sort of qualitative pieces of work with different staff groups. Contact details. We're very happy to hear from anyone from around the country, from any ethnic minority group. And if you email my study team, we'll be in touch. It's essentially to undertake a short interview or focus group to try and understand what your experience of working during the pandemic have been. Have you had to be redeployed, etc.? And we're really keen, because we know that people from Asian backgrounds unfortunately don't take part in medical research, and so we're really keen that we try and understand why this disproportionate risk is occurring. Many of our colleagues have passed away from COVID-19, and we need to understand this very importantly. And as a second aspect, there will be communication actually to many of you coming out over the next few weeks, actually, from a number of bodies inviting you to take part in a different aspect of UK Reach. If you could email my study team, that would be we'd be really interested in hearing from people, particularly from Asian and Black backgrounds, because that's a group that haven't historically taken part in medical research. Over. Just sorry to take up your. Archie, there was one question that someone raised about, I can't remember, there was a question about, I think it was from maybe Riaz about.
Yes, it was a question from Dr. Riaz, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a very important question that Dr. Riaz has raised about the best target journal. And one of the aspects is that there are basically two types of journals that you can submit to. One are what we would call paywall journals. So you basically submit and they make their funds and their money from basically charging libraries and subscribers money. And then the second aspect is the different type is an libraries and subscribers money. And then the second aspect is the different type is an open access journal, where you essentially pay an upfront fee to publish. I have to say, over time, open access historically used to be looked at or frowned upon as being, oh my goodness, you can't publish without paying. But actually, over time, it's changing, and people than some of the journals behind the paywall. And many of you will be thinking, well, that's haven't got that money, but actually they often waive fees, particularly for junior members of staff, and they have a lot of ways of you not having to necessarily pay those fees. In terms of deciding which journal to go for, I think it very much depends on what topic it is. I would look at whether you think it's novel enough that it needs to go into a higher impact and work with your co-authors. But in general, what I would expect is that you would try and aim for the highest impact without being unrealistic. And that's difficult to say without knowing the topic that you're working on. Thank you.
All right. I think I can ask one last final question, which would be of interest to a lot of junior researchers. As a junior researcher, what kind of research skills do you think is important to acquire? I'm talking about learning more about methodology, about statistics, etc. So what do you think is the basic starter pack which a junior trainee should try to acquire in the beginning years? It's open to all of you to answer.
Do you want me to? I can answer the first from my point of view. For my fellows, the important things are to be able to collect data accurately and be able to write. And writing is one of those aspects that unfortunately takes a lot of work practice to get to the point where it's of a high enough standard. But within actually the project itself, skills like statistics are invaluable. There are lots of clinicians who can't do statistics. And if you can learn statistics, which aren't that difficult actually, from the programs, you are basically everyone's friend because everyone will come to you. So that's from my point of view. I don't know about others.
All right. I think if there's no other points to add, I think we can conclude the session. If there's no other points to add, I think we can conclude the session. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll be putting out Dr. Parik's PDF as a handout for everybody to access later as well. Thank you so much, and have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hello everyone is being a father to 2 children. He enjoys cycling and the occasional triathlon too. Welcome, Dr. Chris Sanders.
Thanks. No triathlon for a bit now, but anyway, hopefully in the future. Thanks.
Dr. Zahira Kapasi is a clinical psychologist working across a range of settings, offering direct one-to-one therapy, family work, group work, staff consultation, teaching and training. Her recent NHS experiences have predominantly been based in learning disabilities and child and adolescent mental health services. She is an assessor for the Clinical Psychology Doctorate course at the University of Leicester and works with the Willows Academy as a clinical tutor. Her previous research has focused on language use and language switching in therapy when working with bilingual or multilingual individuals. Welcome, Dr. Zahira Kapasi. Over to you now.
And our experiences which fill up or empty depending on the degree of stress, joy or calm it brings. And just imagine that all the experiences that are stressful are actually filling up your bucket. So with that in mind, I would like you to introduce you to a colleague of mine, Kishore, and his bucket. So Kishore is in the UK and he works in a busy hospital 5 days a week. He does some on-calls over the weekend, which have become a bit more frequent and busier. Of the day and ongoing work politics that he senses just seem to make it difficult to influence the changes he'd like. Home, he's really conscious that he's not spent time with his children. It's really important to him, and he's not spending the time he'd like to give. He often feels so tired when he's just getting home, and he just doesn't have the mental space to give them what they need. Plus, he's got emails to answer, there's a course he's registered, a combination of it all. I mean, whatever it is, it's a lot, isn't it? And if we just take a step back, we can really see those thoughts and emotions and experiences that are stressful for Kishore just slowly filling up his bucket. And we can see how his bucket might nearly be full or at risk of overflowing. So whether you are listening and you're a doctor or a nurse or have a different role in healthcare currently, there may be at this time, and that's okay because we will have them. But just think, are there stresses going into your bucket that you may have some influence over? Are there things that could be tweaked to change at least the speed of the flow of what's going in your bucket? And I think it's really important to consider that all the experiences that are stressful filling up your bucket, and if we think about your bucket, and if we think about it like this, we can see that the more this fills up, the more it. And also think about what your bucket looks like. So each one of us has a different bucket, a different size bucket, depending on our own vulnerability. And each one of us has a different flow of what goes in and out. So being in the profession that you are in, I think in some ways is a real gift because it to take the breaks. If a colleague is at their desk for a long period of time, prompt them to just have a walk or stretch their legs. Can you agree on a shared check-in time each day so you have a bit of a debrief? Can you share really helpful strategies between you? And for those, I guess, of you that are listening in and listen to this and are managers or leaders of services out there, this is important, just as important for you before putting it on someone else. So if you're feeling the weight of the stresses, just check in with your bucket, check in with each other's. And so I hope that that's helpful for you to take away and just think about really and consider and see if you can tailor some of the things that we've talked about according to your own needs. One of the great ways actually to relieve stress.
Just checking in at this moment. Okay, the slides are just coming up. Perhaps if you're happy to just have a go, this is a brief mindfulness practice that can be really adoptive for pretty much any length of time. But if we go for just a few minutes, if you're happy to, if you want to just sit quietly, that's fine too. So it's an invitation, really, if you like, to put a pause in your day and in your schedule. So perhaps if you want to kind of lower your gaze or close your eyes if you're happy to, and let's just take a moment. So just to notice what's going on in our mind and bodies right now. An analogy that's sometimes talked about is what the weather pattern is like inside. So what's the weather pattern here right now? What thoughts are here? What feelings? Okay. And then just to widen your awareness, perhaps to encompass the whole body now, if that's possible. So sort of breathing with the body. It's run at Leicester University. Really a sort of lifestyle medicine program with mindfulness as a thread that weaves through it. And that was acknowledging, I suppose, the importance of looking after ourselves and also for people generally to acknowledge that lifestyle is so important, as we've already talked about, finding those moments for exercise. But this, looking after ourselves is not a new concept. And I know that Dr. Claire Gerard has talked in the BAPIO conference and Zahira was using that concept of pulling your own oxygen mask down first, which I think is really key, particularly now. If we can have the next slide, that'd be great. So, and as we acknowledge, burnout's really common. We were saying pause and slow down and find something we can do in that moment, perhaps to interrupt that, emotional response to being overwhelmed, for example. Next slide, please. This is, how we fill our time. We think our thoughts can be churning away, and sometimes it can rob us of that enjoyment of that moment, whether it's just a walk in the park. So it's trying to acknowledge that and self-awareness, I suppose, and mindfulness is one way of doing it, but obviously there's lots of others. However what works for you, really. This is one of the tools in the toolbox, I guess. Next slide. Mindfulness is one way of kind of trying to bring our attention back on purpose to what's happening right here, right now. Next slide, please. So we're aiming to sort of train ourselves to kind of notice this and bring our attention back. And so we're trying to get it out of this default mode, which is when our minds wander. And mind wandering might be, fine to do for a little bit, but actually we can often, as we all know, be our own worst inner critic, and negative thoughts can take hold if we're not careful. So it's trying to acknowledge that when that's happening, and trying to sort of bring in parts of the brain involved in attention, and trying to kind of wire in, if you like, this concept of neuroplasticity. So our patterns of thinking can perhaps change, for us in the future. Next slide, please. So we've got this sort of sense of trying to pay attention to, if you jot something down, some common themes often come up. So, for example, daily life, it might be driving. You sort of, your mind wanders. You're kind of at the wheel. You've got a sort of stretch of road that's straight, and maybe you don't have to pay attention too much. Anything else you can give, this is something you can, and it's increasingly being robbed from us. If you like, we've got these smartphones capable of all this high tech stuff, but they sometimes rob us from attending to what's really mattering in our lives. So, next slide, please. So it's just being aware of the more dependence we have on these things, the more they can affect also our thinking and our problem solving. So next slide, please. So, I mentioned, and in terms of, clinical mental health, performance, relationships, next slide, please. The thing we did at the beginning was this 3-minute breathing space, and that's probably, you can cut it down to 1 minute or even 30 seconds in between patients, in between, encounters, maybe in the car if you're stopped, but you don't close your eyes if you're driving. Next slide, please. So you can Google that, and there's a whole lot of resources out there. So the book I'd probably recommend.
Personality in the workplace, asked by Avi Glavi.
Okay, that's a really good question. Zahira, any thoughts on that? How do we recover from a narcissistic personality in the workplace?
I've just unmuted myself. Hi, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it does depend on whether you're referring to yourself or you're referring to someone else. I think if it's a referral for yourself and you're thinking about your own recovery, then it's fantastic that there is some insight there, but obviously a really difficult journey. I would say perhaps just being really mindful of boundaries and keeping boundaries and having a set kind of agenda for every maybe interaction that you're having. And I think the similar thing goes for someone else if you're working with a personality that might seem a little narcissistic, perhaps not think of it as so, but think of it as more an unmet need. So what is the need that's being fed, and where else can you get it from? If the workplace is probably not the healthiest place, where else can you get that from in terms of sharing your story, or just writing a journal or sharing something about yourself where there's a need to I think just share.
Excellent. So, good afternoon, everyone. This is day 3 of a fantastic BAPIO conference. We've seen some amazing work being presented and met some great people over the last 2 days. Today's session is a culmination of the research and innovation competition. As you will remember that we had 120 fantastic abstracts submitted, of which around 20 very senior people spend hours trying to judge them. And we were down to 19 presentations, and we were delighted to hear them yesterday. And it was a really tough job, I know, being one of the judges yesterday, to try and select the top 4 that are going to be presented today. So today, for the next hour, really have your gray cells charged. We're going to hear some amazing research stories from 4 top presenters. In order to help me today chair this particular session, I have 2 co-chairs who will introduce themselves soon. And we also have a panel of 3 very eminent judges who have spent years in research and presentations themselves. So I have the privilege of introducing the first judge, who is Professor Geeta Menon. She's the Postgraduate Dean for South London. She's also the chair of the Research Network in South London, and an amazing woman, a great role model, and she has kindly agreed to judge this particular session. I'll hand over to Professor Angie Doshanji to present the next judge.
Thank you, Indranil. Can you hear me all? Thank you very much for the invitation to chair this session. I concur with what Indranil has said. It's been really, really uplifting to see our junior colleagues doing such amazing work, both in basic sciences as well as in translational research. My name is Angie Deshani. I am an obstetrician gynecologist by trade, but also a professor of patient safety and associate professor in medical education at the University of Leicester and the University of Loughborough, and also head of University of Loughborough, and also head of Year 3 at the Leicester Medical School. I have the pleasure of introducing our second judge, which is Professor Mahendra Patel. Now, he's got an esteemed career. It'll probably take all of 8 minutes for me to summarize that, but I'm going to try my best in a minute. He is the Professor of Pharmacy Practice at both Bradford and Sussex University. National Secretary to the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, and the National Pharmacy Lead for Multi-Centered Study at Oxford. So I'm looking forward to the 4 presentations. And I just want to say best of luck. I am now going to hand over to my co-chair, Deepa.
Hi, thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Deepa. I am a paediatric respiratory registrar based at Leicester Royal Infirmary, and I myself have a keen interest in research. I have the pleasure of introducing our third judge, who is Dr. Prashant Patel, who is a consultant in metabolic medicine.
By requesting Professor Angie to invite the first speaker to the stage.
Okay, the first speaker is Lindsay
Dr. Angie, I'm sorry to interrupt. The participants have not raised hands yet to be invited to the stage.
Okay.
We are waiting for them to raise hands.
And the hands are going up. Will you let us know when they're
Yes.
in the room?
So we have actually raised hands.
Okay, I'm happy to introduce Morgan if Morgan is ready.
Yeah, I'll invite him onto the stage.
Okay, so I'd like to invite Morgan Blizzard, who's an educational fellow from Leeds, to present his work. Please. Blizzard, who's an educational fellow from Leeds, to present his work. Please. Hello. Morgan, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you. Not sure.
Their ethnicity. Next slide, please. What's more, when treated as a group, the international graduates who withhold their ethnicity have the poorest relative exam performance. This graph shows the probability of passing a professional exam on the first attempt. Please. Next, this graph shows the relationship between the extent of exam differential attainment on the x-axis and the proportion of IMGs withholding their ethnicity on the y-axis. When every subspecialty is considered, there is a significant and positive correlation between specialty differential attainment and the proportion of IMGs withholding ethnicity. As you can see, there are several outliers, but these tend to be small subspecialties where very low trainee numbers may introduce statistical noise and lead to the possibility of type 2 statistical error. Next slide, please. To interrogate this further, I limited analysis to just the larger specialties with over 1,000 exam candidates per year. Here the correlation between the variables is much stronger and even more highly significant. What we observe is that within specialties with worse differential attainment, more doctors withhold their ethnicity from the GMC. Next slide, please. So, we have a subgroup of unknown doctors with especially poor exam performance who are not included in statistics that inform our policy decisions. The strong association of ethnicity non-disclosure with the size of differential attainment might imply that a perception of an ethnicity disadvantage is a motivator in non-declaration. If this were true, and the unknown group contained even a proportional number of BAME doctors, then our current estimates of BAME IMG differential attainment would be underestimates, and the problem would be even worse than we currently appreciate. My previously demonstrated correlation also raises the possibility that ethnicity non-disclosure may be a marker of candidates' trust or lack of it in our regulators. Final slide, please. Looking to the future, I'm hopeful that a multifaceted, multi-agency approach to address systemic inequity may earn restored trust in our regulators. For example, the GMC's Welcome to UK Practice initiative may be particularly helpful if the current system can be repaired to better meet the needs of our most disenfranchised colleagues. Thank you for your attention. I'd welcome any questions or feedback you may have.
Thank you very much, Morgan. I'm going to hand over to the judges for questions, please.
Thanks very much, Morgan. And I would just like to ask, I think that the data is quite, important, and it's giving you some important indicators. How do you think this sort of data would help you in doing having some impact and analysis on taking this forward? Because clearly it is, if that data is right and if people are not revealing their ethnicity, and it's going to show us that the data is worse than what it is now. So what would the impact be, and how would you be able to take it forward?
So if we use the model data to predict to assume a proportional number of BAME international graduates and white graduates make up that group, we could have almost a modelled estimate of what the true extent of differential attainment is, and it would be worse than what we currently appreciate, and that just adds extra almost imperative or political drive to achieve change. It makes it a more stark motivator to achieve change. I think that using the declaration as an indicator of trust could be used as a one of the evaluation markers of the success of the Welcome to UK Practice initiative. So we know from before that came in what the declaration rate was. And so then if candidates who come through that process are then invited to declare their ethnicity, we'll be able to see almost a metric by which we can evaluate how successful in fostering good relations that initiative is.
Thank you. I'll pass it over.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Morgan. Very insightful there and very interesting and topical. Can I just ask, obviously we group people into the BME category. How do you assess the differentiation between the different disparate groups within that category? And how would you take that moving forward for further analysis?
Yeah, I think that's
moving forward for further analysis.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And currently, the publicly available GMC data doesn't delineate between the different ethnicities that make up the BAME group. And I guess for any one individual, the label of Black, Asian, minority ethnic is at least 2/3 inaccurate in most cases. And I think it's probably a pragmatic decision to group people together to achieve statistical power to allow for comparisons, and then that's useful politically because it shines a light onto a pernicious issue, but then it also you lose resolution in our understanding because not every group's experience is the same, and the challenges that one group face may be subtly or grossly different from another. So I think it probably a useful next step might be to request the breakdown of the data. And it would probably suggest differences, but I imagine that some groups are much smaller than others, and so it might be difficult to have firm, statistically robust distinctions, but then we may be able to have suggestions of trends which could be useful. So I guess requesting either just informally or a freedom of information request to the GMC for that breakdown would be a useful next step.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you very much for keeping to time. We will now prepare for the second speaker, and I'll hand over to.
So,
hello.
I'll bring on Islam Miligi next.
I'd like to invite Islam Miligi, who is a research fellow at Nottingham, to present their work.
Do you hear and see me? Okay. Sorry, do you hear me? Right? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Sorry. Yeah, can I have my slides up, please? Thank you. Yeah. So thanks a lot for the introduction. And as a reminder, I'm Islam Miligi, a research fellow, University of Nottingham. And I'm very pleased to meet you again to present two invasive breast disease. Next slide, please. I can't see it. Yeah, okay, sorry. So first, let me walk you through the rationale behind studying DCIS and why it's so important. Although it's pre-invasive and patient may not die from that, the traditional ductal model postulates a linear sequential progression from normal epithelium to invasive carcinoma via different stages, including DCIS, which represents a direct precursor of invasive breast cancer. In clinical setting, a proportion of patients with extensive DCIS are present without signs of invasion. Although it cannot be precluded that these cases would progress over time, the DCIS growth pattern suggests that these cases have a limited invasive potential. On the other hand, other patients have a limited amount of DCIS adjacent to microinvasive or invasive foci, suggesting a high invasive potential. Next slide, please. So based on the historical reports, mastectomy could virtually guarantee a cure in these patients with DCIS with up to 98 to 99% 10-year survival. However, mastectomy would be an overtreatment for many of these small lesions. And currently, most women with DCIS are treated with breast conserving surgery followed by whole breast irradiation. But conservative surgery carries its own risk as well of local recurrence, and up to 50% of subsequent ipsilateral local recurrence are invasive cancer from which the patient may die. So the main aim of DCIS management is to maximize breast conservation and therefore preserve the cosmetic appearance and to avoid invasive breast cancer. Therefore, we need to predict when and whether DCIS will become invasive carcinoma, as well as to identify factors and establish objective predictive markers associated cell-to-cell contact and localized to early cell-to-cell contact sites. It regulates actin dynamics by binding to proteins at these sites. Next slide, please. So we aimed to assess protein expression of FAT1 in a large cohort of DCIS and evaluate its prognostic implication. A well-characterized and annotated cohort of DCIS, including pure DCIS and DCIS mixed with invasive breast cancer, diagnosed between 1990 and 2012 at Nottingham City Hospital in the UK, was used. Tissue microarrays were prepared from representative DCIS lesions of the pure cases and from DCIS and invasive tumors from the mixed cases. All clinical pathology and shown in this table. And also as shown here, the annual rates over the study period show the higher rates of breast conserving surgery as a primary surgical choice over years, with comparable rates of final breast conserving surgery after the excisions. A significant increase of radiotherapy use post-operatively after primary conservative surgery over the last 10 years. Next slide, please. Membranocytoplasmic FAT1 staining was assessed using the semi-quantitative H scoring, taking into consideration stained tumor cells within each tissue core. High FAT1 expression was significantly associated with good prognostic factors in pure DCIS, including low nuclear grade, absence of comedon-type necrosis, positive ER and PR status, and negative HER2 status. Next slide, please. To confirm the prognostic significance of FAT1 in breast cancer, and given the deficiency of data of the transcriptomic profiles of DCIS, FAT1 normalized mRNA expression was evaluated as a potential prognostic marker using the Molecular Taxonomy of Breast Cancer International Consortium, the METABRIC dataset, that comprised 1,980 tumors of invasive breast cancer with comprehensive molecular characterization and long-term follow-up. And this has shown that high mRNA of FAT1 was associated with favorable prognostic factors and outcome. In the current study, the median H score was the highest in pure DCIS tumors, followed by lower levels in the DCIS component of mixed cases and much lower levels in the invasive component.
Thank you, Islam. I'll hand over to the judges for their questions now.
Yes, I can.
In a less intensive cancers, which should have been done by a year now. So how far are we in intensive cancers, which should have been done by a year now? So how far are we of using this technology into transcribe into a real benefit for the patients? Mhm. Thank you. I did. Thank you very much, Islam. I'll hand over to Professor Menon now. Thank you.
Sorry, I think Mahendra is going.
Is it mine? Okay. Sorry about that.
Mahendra.
Be you. I thought it was going to be you. Be you. I thought it was going to be you, Professor Menon, but it's not a problem. Yes, thank you, Islam. Can you hear me for a very great presentation? Well, what I would like to know is some of the details on your slide in terms of what is the transferability of this, and how do you think we can ability of this, and how do you think we can and how do you think we can overcome some of those barriers in making it practice? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Islam. Well done. We wish you all the best, and I'm going to hand over to Professor Doshani for the next speaker.
I'd like to invite Lindsay Hutchin to the stage, please, our next presenter. Lindsay, are you there?
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, super. So Lindsay's a research physio from Leicester. So welcome, Lindsay, and ready whenever you are.
Thank you. I'll just wait for my slides. Lovely, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So thank you again for allowing me to present this work here today. I'm Lindsay Houchin-Woloff and I'm the Physiotherapy Research Lead at the University Hospitals of Leicester. I'm presenting today on behalf of my co-authors some patient-reported outcome measures from first metatarsophalangeal joint arthrodesis, which I'll refer to as MTPJ going forward just to save myself some time. Next slide, please. PGA going forward, just to save myself some time. Next slide, please. So first, MTP joint pain is a common cause of pain in the UK, and one cause of this is end-stage osteoarthritis, which is described as disabling by nearly 3/4 of affected individuals. People with this condition experience substantial difficulties in performing weight-bearing activities and also have significantly worse quality of life compared to people who don't have the condition. MTPJ arthrodesis or fusion surgery is a well-established procedure in the treatment of this condition. And patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs, are useful in determining the result of this surgery in terms of improving pain, function, and health-related quality of life. Two questionnaires that are commonly used are the Manchester-Oxford Foot Questionnaire, or MOX-FQ, and the Euroqual 5-Dimension Tool, or the EQ5D. These are both known to be sensitive to change following foot and ankle surgery. However, we don't know if baseline scores and the presence of comorbidities have an influence on the change in these PROMs. Next slide, please. Therefore, our aims were to identify the change in these two patient-reported outcome measures and to see whether baseline scores describe the impact of comorbidities on the change in both of these patients. This is important to understand so that we can see which patients are likely to benefit from surgery and to aid clinical discussions. Next slide, from surgery and to aid clinical discussions. Next slide, please. Data was collected prospectively, and patients who had both pre and post PROMS data available were included in the analysis. The PROMS data was collected on average 5.2 months post-operatively, and the surgery notes were also cross-checked with radiographic findings. For those who are unfamiliar with the questionnaires, the MOX-FQ generates a total score from 3 subdomains of pain, walking or standing, and social interaction. And the EQ5D generates a total score from 5 domains on mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain or discomfort, anxiety or depression. And both of these questionnaires look at if the lowest score indicates a better health status. The EQ5D also has a general health today thermometer or VAS scale between 0 and 100, and a score closer to 100 indicates better health. Next slide, please. So on to the results. 90 patients were identified and 52 had complete pre and post PROMS data. The mean age was around 57 years, with 78% being female. Most cases were unilateral and fixed with 2 screws. 37% had other foot procedures carried out at the same time. Comorbidities were diabetes in 2%, hypertension in 21%, rheumatoid arthritis in 43%. 10% were current smokers, and the average weekly units of alcohol was around 5. So the only comorbidity which was shown to have an influence on PROMS was rheumatoid arthritis, in that the presence of rheumatoid arthritis significantly reduced the change in the EQ5D total score. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there we go. So in conclusion, baseline scores in both patient-reported outcome measures were correlated with the change scores following surgery. This indicates that we may be able to identify a baseline score which could predict the outcome in PROMS and therefore target who we offer surgery to. Comorbidities had little influence on the change in both patient-reported outcome measures following surgery. other than the presence of rheumatoid arthritis, which did dampen the change in EQ5D total score. This is useful to inform preoperative discussions with patients. Next slide, please. Just like to thank my co-authors, Mr. Bergler and Mr. Mangwani, people who contributed data, and also everybody at the Leicester Orthopaedics Department at the University Hospitals of Leicester. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I'm going to hand you over to the judges now for questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Lindsay. I think increasingly prompts are the very important measures to assess the utility of any procedures. I think in that regard, you assessed a very important measure there. But in the study you did, there was 1/3 of patients had this procedure, also had other procedure as well at the same time. Now, I mean, is it often easier to choose those kind of patients who actually have a complicated surgeries at the same setting, and how is that affecting the specific intervention of orthodontist here? You know, if you
Yeah, I
have
think that's
how is it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a good question, and actually something we ought to look at is to pick out the people versus those that, like you say, had complex procedures involving, you know, things like bunion correction and other things at the same time, because that might have an impact on long-term health-related quality of life. I haven't presented that today, but I think you're absolutely right. It could have an impact long-term.
Thanks, Lindsay. What I would like to see is how would you actually then try and promote this project across your region, for example? So, you know, you've developed this prompts. How are you going to actually, you know, make sure that this is something that's done across the region?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. People often are measuring patient-reported outcomes, but everybody's measuring something different. And I think what we showed in this data was that actually the MOX-FQ, which was the more specific outcome measure for orthopedic pain, performed better than a generic health status questionnaire like the EQ5D. So I guess we would be trying to get that message out to trainees and, you know, teams across the region to say that you should be using a disease-specific tool. And if we're all measuring the same thing, then we can compare results across settings and, you know, do some benchmarking work with other departments.
So thank you very much, Lindsay. And also the job of the timekeeper is rather easy, I must say. So you can step down. Thank you. And we're going to move on to the final presentation. I'll invite Deepa to invite the.
Thank you. So next I'd like to invite Karen Borges to present her work. Good luck. Are you there, Karen?
I hope I have not been too premature in my comment about timekeeping.
You've just tempted fate, Indranil. So Mahendra, you and I are doing the questions for this.
Yeah, so yeah. Okay. I'm going to rely on the Prashad, so hopefully we can kickstart this now. On the Prashad, so hopefully we can kickstart this now.
I am fine. I think that's fine. I think the order was slightly disturbed, but I think that if that is the worst thing that can happen, that's fine.
That's nothing.
That's fine.
Are we, Jitin, do we need any assistance with?
Praveen is already on stage. He can bring her over. Actually, I think it's the problem with the connection at her end.
Okay.
Now the yeah, now the internet is fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Internal, it's the same presentation presented by somebody else, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a group of, I think it's a group of junior doctors who did the work. So it depends on how hard we are making them work. You see, that might be the reason.
Yeah, it'll be more kind given every work they're doing with redeployment and second COVID wave. Yeah, kind. And thank you for increasing the amount of price for this competition as well. That would help.
I'm asking her to try and relog in again, just to try to get the link up.
So Karen is replacing Christy, no? Now?
Yes. I think we've got 12 minutes to self-destruct, so we still have a little bit of time.
I'll carry on with my breakfast come lunch, okay? I would love to share, but I'll share virtually. How about that?
We have thanked you virtually as well.
So Jitin or Chitra, a little bit of running commentary would make our heart rates go down.
So Dr. Nil, I'm trying to re-establish a connection with Karen. She's experienced. I'm not sure it works that way because it's just a platform. It works with audio and video. We'll contact Praveen.
Internal. So was there a problem with this one and the 19 presentations? No.
So we had one or two stuff where, people, depending on their own internet connections, was a little bit of instability. But I think that's part of life. But I'm hoping that Karen is... I don't have a number, so I can't contact her.
Medical training has to change now from ABC to airway breathing circulation to airway breathing connectivity. Six.
We now lost Jitin and Chitra. So
Indranilji, your attire is also matching your background.
Yes.
Very coordinated.
Thank you for noticing.
Stage, I'm bringing you.
So the next one. There we go. Right, so for a little bit of background, when the first sort of wave of COVID cases hit the UK, a no visiting policy was instituted at hospitals around the country.
And as a result of this, we found that both patients and relatives began to feel quite isolated, and we found that staff became increasingly anxious in that they weren't able to really respond to patients' and relatives' needs. As such, virtual visiting was proposed as a solution to this, the benefits of which were multiple, but included sort of improved resilience for the patients, better reassurance for families, and also reduced pressure on already busy clinicians to provide daily sort of clinical updates. So next slide, please. Great. So at the trust that we were working at, we were employed to help adopt a virtual visiting solution. What we were using was the A-Touchaway application that was downloaded onto 4G-enabled iPad and Android devices. And the combination of this application and the 4G-enabled tablets was known as the Lifelines project. For this project, we got approval from the Caldecott Guardian, Information Governance, and Trust Data Protection officers. And the images on this slide just gives a little bit of the idea of the interface that we as doctors were using to carry out the virtual visits and then subsequently train staff to use by themselves. And we sort of made calls to carry out the virtual visits and then subsequently train staff to use on sessions. And the second was focused on actually recruiting champions and training champions for the project. And I think these are sort of the four main points that I thought were quite interesting in terms of the results that were gathered. So firstly, after our interventions, we started with 77% and we ended up with 87% of staff that were aware of the project, which we found was an interesting sort of measure to go by rather than how many calls were made, and also staff confidence. And this was because we found that in terms of how many calls were made on a week-to-week basis, it sort of depended on how many patients were actually in that ward or that area at a given time. And I think as time went on, we found fewer patients were actually on the ward, or there were fewer patients who were actually sedated and actually needed assistance. This was something that we were trying to directly target with our interventions within the PDSA cycles. But it was quite difficult because we found there was quite a high turnover of staff, and we found that staff was being redeployed, which was out of our control in terms of ensuring sustainability or that knowledge kind of lived on. But we hoped that now that there were training modules and things on the internet, and champions that were more long-term members of staff, that hopefully we could get around this a little bit more. But yes, next slide, please. And yeah, as I touched before, I think future directions from this work goes into assessing the benefits of having a dedicated family communications team. And we're actually doing research on that that's hoping to be published. Secondly, having a look at where virtual visiting fits within hospital day-to-day life outside the COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, to see whether we can actually use virtual visiting in other settings such as elderly care homes. And then next slide, please. Thank you. And I think these are just a few personal takeaways that I think we've learned as junior doctors that we'd sort of like to share with the group. And it is that we found that virtual visiting definitely improves the well-being of patients and relatives. We found that using video calling promotes inclusivity and breaks down language barriers. Video calling is now widely used and should be available to facilitate all of these virtual visits. And below are sort of all the partners that made this project what it really was. So yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Karen, for that lovely presentation. I'll hand you over to the judges now for some questions.
Very much, Karen. I think that's quite an impressive project. What I'd like to understand, I know you touched a bit on the barriers, but when you tried to implement this nationally, what were the main barriers that you faced? Because about the sustainability of the project. How were you able to make this a sustainable project across nationally?
I think it was in terms of actual connection with national sites, we didn't have that constant feedback loop as we were having in terms of being able to deploy them within our own trust. So I think really asking whether our help or advice was actually sustainable, I can't really say, but help or advice was actually sustainable, I can't really say. But in terms of, I know the barriers that other sites were facing, there were quite a few challenges that were actually different to what we were facing, because it was just different environments in terms of we had a dedicated budget for a family communications team, and not every hospital.
The widening health inequalities, but again, the family communication champions, and how do you want to reach out to those people that may have some issues around technology?
Right. So to address the first point in terms of health inequalities, I think we found that the virtual visitation was actually kind of promoted inclusivity in multiple ways. Firstly, I think it was a solution that was able to cater to the patients in terms of, what sort of disabilities we were kind of facing from their side. And we could kind of still, where there was learning disabilities or things like that, I think they were still able to see patients who, their relatives. But then also when we talk about more like language barriers, I think the initial setup, which involved, a phone call and kind of.
So if you're back in the stage, we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome everyone for the afternoon session. I would like to hand over to Dr. Chakravarti to introduce our chair, please. Thank you. Dr. Chakravarti to introduce our chair, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome to this session. Sorry, beg your pardon. He was the Director of the RCP Medical Workforce Unit for 5 years until being appointed the RCP Registrar in 2014. Director of the RCP Medical Workforce Unit for 5 years until being appointed the RCP Registrar in 2014. And in this role, he oversaw professional and clinical. Affairs, both in the UK and internationally. And his main policy areas were workforce, healthcare funding, the future of general medicine, the medical registrar, and keeping medicine brilliant. In 2018, he was elected the 121st RCP president, and these domains include recruitment, assessment, career progression, research and academia, leadership and excellence, and professionalism. We all acknowledge that there are differences in attainment of career excellence in these domains for people with protected characteristics, be it gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, religion, etc. By way of this project, BAPIO is looking to undertake research to inform a white paper, which is going to be presented in the 2021 BAPIO annual conference. And this white paper will be informed by a program of work containing a lot of background research, lots of interactive working and workshop, etc. And I would like to invite the next speaker. We have 3 themes to discuss in this session before the coffee break, and that includes recruitment, assessment, and career progression. And we are going to discuss all the data that is currently available and that our teams are going to present to you about differential attainment in these domains.
Then we have our first speaker ready. So let me know where I'm just presenting the slides now. Okay?
Please, thank you.
Yeah, when you're ready. Yeah, when you're ready.
So thanks, Siva. I guess we need to be, if anybody has any particular questions on assessment following that. I had a couple of questions. One Rupal Shah's put their hands up about career progression, but we're going to come on to that. And Raghu's put his hand up also sort of around recruitment, so that's separate. So does anybody have any particular questions about assessment? I mean, so Mike, I was clearly part of the round table that was mentioned there, and it's a really rich discussion. I think the evidence that differential attainment or differential award or whatever people would prefer to call it is completely irrefutable. So we know it's there. The challenge for us is how do we do something about it? And I think that is the what hopefully the Bridging the Gap work will allow us to take forward. So what poll? So there is, I understand, a differential attainment questionnaire that's been sent out by BAPIO. There was a text by Sunil Daga earlier in the chat. So I don't know if anybody from BAPIO would just like to update what that is and how people can fill it in. Savannah?
Yes, this is being an ongoing questionnaire that's being circulated in we can certainly do that. I will ask Sunil to send that in the general chat box if everyone's interested, and they can answer that if for people who are in this talk. And otherwise, we will do another. We will keep doing further notices on social media, particularly in Twitter, for people to follow, as well as in mail shots. So please do respond to those if you can.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I think we're ready for the next speaker. Thank you, Professor Dave. If you can exit the panel by clicking on the leave button, please. Thank you. So I've just invited the next speaker, so just waiting for them to accept.
So just whilst they're doing that, just to say that if you click on the polls button on the right hand side discussion bit rather than the talk.
Yeah, we do have our next speaker, Dr. Jyoti Srinivas.
Hello.
Right, I'm just sharing your presentation now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jyoti Srinivas, a pediatrician from Milton Keynes Hospital. I'm presenting this work on behalf of a big group of people that we worked on recruitment aspect of differential attainment. Next slide, please. I'm glad that Subodh already talked about what is differential attainment, but I want to draw attention that we not public money for them. So we need to be sure that we get them to their final, exam and through it in a sort of equal way and see what are the issues that are coming up with it. The two main things that have happened recently is that we have something called an UK medical applicant cohort study that's been happening with NIHR and University College London, and also an UK medical education database, which has been going on for 10 years, which have a lot of data on it. Now, during this, we looked at also issues like widening participation. We know that children and people from background of low economic status do not get into medical education. We also know about 80% of the medical school applicants come from 20% of the schools in UK. But there is still a differential in how many times you have to apply. Now, there are many underlying factors for this, but this is quite interesting, this data. Now, I know Professor Goddard is here, and Royal College of Physicians have done some work on it. In fact, they published something in October that their annual survey showed 29% of doctors who are white got a post or were offered a post after being shortlisted for the first time, whereas that number comes down to 12% of doctors from BAME background for the same post. Now, for the data for trainees, GP trainees or specialty trainees, again, we know there's a disproportionate number of white and BAME doctors getting appointed. The only place where we found this wasn't, or this was the opposite, were in SAS doctors. We know that a high number of SAS doctors are from BAME background and who are females. And we know that at each level, the recruitment process is slightly different, and still all these exist. Now, while we could get enough data,
we will just have to overrun by about 5 minutes into coffee time. And can we just get our final speaker on the stage? And then we will let Professor Goddard, and then we will let Professor Goddard just have a couple of sentences at the very end after the next speaker.
Thank you very much. My name's Rupal Shah. I work as a GP trainer in Battersea 3 days a week and 2 days as a very much. My name's Rupal Shah. I work as a GP trainer in Battersea 3 days a week and 2 days as Associate Dean in Professional Development. I'm on the London Differential Attainment Strategy Group, so I'm delighted to be part of this. Could I have the slides up if possible?
Thank you. Over to you, for finishing sentences.
Thank you, Rupal. Really interesting. So, as somebody involved in the collection of data and really interesting. So, as somebody involved in the collection of data and the analysis, it's hard and interesting when you try and drill down onto the smaller things. The amount of data you need obviously needs to be bigger. And what we found was we had data on, whatever it was, 322 to 350 people per year. But that still wasn't big enough, so we had to then look at a whole 8-9 years.
We may think that we're providing the same kind of learning, but just virtually. But actually, who can access that if you don't have the ability to participate in that type of learning for whatever reason, whether it's you don't have the right device, you don't have the space to do it, or you just it's just not your thing. I think there's people who are left behind, and it's not obvious. So it really highlights the problem. I think some people are more likely to succeed than others. So I'm talking about general practice predominantly because that's what I know about, I suppose. So the vocational training scheme sessions going to becoming remote, etc. We see it with communication with patients is different. Everything is disjointed. The sort of cohesion of working in a team has been shattered, and we've had to work really actively to try and maintain that. Because
So let's get started then.
Yes. Hello, everybody, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second of the Bridging the Gap series as part of the BAPIO annual conference. My name is Shivani Sharma, and I am the Head of Psychology Division at the University of Hertfordshire, where I also have an executive role around equality and diversity. I'm really happy to be introducing this session in which three new themes will be discussed. The earlier session discussed other themes that are related to the Bridging the Gap project that has 6 strands in total. And this session will be considering research and academia, leadership and excellence, and professionalism. And I'm delighted that we have Susan Carr here to chair the session for us. Susan has a very diverse profile and a high profile portfolio of work. She is the Deputy Medical Director of the GMC. She was also previously Director of Medical Education and the Associate Medical Director at University Hospitals Leicester. By background, Susan is a consultant nephrologist, and if this isn't enough, she also has a master's degree in clinical education, and for this work she's won a British Medical Journal's Excellence in Healthcare Education Award, and she has been elected to the Royal College of Physicians Council. She's a fellow of the UK Academy of Medical Educators and has held several high-profile roles in medical education, including chair of the UK Renal Association's Education and Training Committee and the Foundation School Director and Associate Postgraduate Dean in East Midlands Deanery. So a really impressive profile of medical leadership as well as leadership in education specifically. I'd like to hand over now to Susan to introduce the speakers and to take us through this afternoon's session.
Hello, thank you very much for that, Shivani, and thank you to yourselves and BAPIO for inviting me to come along to what I hope is going to be a really fascinating session this afternoon. So I understand we have 3 speakers this afternoon. I don't actually have their bios or details, so I am actually going to pass back to one of our facilitators who could maybe...
We will ask the speakers to introduce themselves.
Okay, so we're going to ask our 3 speakers who are going to speak in turn to introduce themselves. Thank you for that. So over to our first speaker.
We can load the slide, please.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you, Sue. Hello, guys. I'm Sunil Daga. I'm a consultant nephrologist at Leeds and a honorary secretary for BAPIO Institute for Health Research. I'm just waiting for my slides to come up. While they're coming up, as Subhana has already mentioned, Yes, so over the next 8 minutes, I'm going to summarize an important piece of work. So this is about differential attainment or differential award, as mentioned already, in research and clinical academia. And you could see it's a collective effort of people across the country who have come together, and also made some really good friends in the path. Next slide, please. So I think the important question is why EDI. I mean, it's not just to make noise and put banners across and fight for the right. The important thing about EDI is it's really important for the growth and impact in our country, the UK. Lots of studies have shown that a diverse team are very resilient. The problem solving is better if you have a diverse team rather than all highly qualified problem solver. And a recent review of 1 million papers showed that the scientific impact, the 5 year of citation, is much higher if the team is diverse than actually non-diverse teams. So it's about a driving force. It's not about just fighting for equality. Next, please. So I don't need to make the case or problem statement. We all know here, but I was shocked to see the slide on the right. So I don't need to make the case or problem statement. We all know here, but I was shocked to see the slide on the right side, which is UK professor by ethnic group. It's absolutely shocking. 0.6% of black ethnicity as professor. If you look at women, black women, less than 20 across the UK. Now that is a problem, guys. I mean, it's not just about individual people. There is a system problem here. Next, please. So the gap is, across the journey, a number of assessments, the so-called fair assessment. As you can see, that's my favorite slide, and we all feel that the best is not brought out, whether it is when you're applying for a new investigator research grant, or a investigator funding, or various paths across the progress. There is a problem that is not allowing the best to come out. Next, please. So what did we do? So 9 of us actually made a hypothesis. We wanted to look at all the national bodies who have done a report in EDI, in clinical academia and research. And you can see on the pie chart, it's a range of bodies, from government bodies to public health, to universities, to colleges, national academies. Next slide, please. And what we found, so there are a range of protected characteristics that we wanted to look at, but we went for the top 5 to just get a feel what these reports are talking about. And you can see across the 19 reports, the most common one is gender that's being reported. And it's not a surprise. 2005, we saw a landmark thing called Athena Swan that actually in next 10 years following brought the gender agenda right on the top of the universities and institute. And hence you can see 79% of the white or BAME. There is such a heterogeneity within the BAME, but also within the white colleagues. They're not acknowledging some of the factors that can cause differential attainment. And most of the reports were focusing on deficit model, like sending people to a bias training, sending people to improve your skills training. And most of the projects were very short and not embedded practice. Next, please. So what can be done and what has been done? Well, I think in the current environment, just coming out of the BLM movement, Race Equality Charter, I hope it works a bit like Athena Swan, but obviously it may not solve the whole problem, but at least help a little bit. And please stop focusing on deficit model. Next, please. What do you like? So the audience in the team, you just had a coffee. I hope you had some cakes and cookies. What those pictures are showing, the one on the left-hand side is a chocolate coating on the cake. It looks like the diversity has been looked at, but really they're just doing some talks like we're doing today, some marketing materials, and cookies are interesting. So within a university, some groups, some departments have some real good practice, but across the structure, the diversity is missing. The one on the right-hand side, the diversity is inherent part of the structure. That's what I think we all want. Next one, please. So this is a long journey. We are talking about equality as compared to fee. How do we know that we're getting there, and what areas can we do? Next, please. So that's the workshop planned in a few days' time. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to discuss. And I know the time is limited. Thank you for listening.
Perfect timekeeping. I think Professor Parr, there might be time if you allow for some questions. Time if you allow for some questions now.
Yes, that would be great. I'll see if there's any coming on the chat box. So we do have a couple of questions here.
So BAPIO is asking that race equality charter was introduced at the same time as Athena Swan, and why that has not taken effect. And I think the reason is Athena Swan, a lot of funders were looking for the award, silver award or bronze award, where I don't think the race equality is my feeling.
Sure. I mean, Advanced HE's own independent review of the charters, well, Athena Swan in particular, has shown that most institutions only go for one charter. And it's probably easier in terms of the data that they have access to for them to have started to focus on Athena Swan, which actually was ahead of the game. So some of it is a resourcing issue in terms of how much one institution can do, because they are very labour-intensive submissions.
Yeah, I saw that there was a lot of fatigue even with Athena Swan. So it's all good to have this charter, and how do we get this right on the top of the list? And this is where lobbying and working with allies will be useful.
Thank you so much. I think the other thing about Athena Swan was it was linked to funding, wasn't it? There was a requirement to comply with Athena Swan requirements to apply for certain types of funding, which was very powerful. That was my understanding of it. If we could, there's another question from, I think it's Phoebe's picture I can see. But I think you've answered that about how many black female chairs. The answer was hardly any, Vijay. Sunil showed that on a slide. And we have another question, so it's quite a long one.
I think there were 3.2% of chairs across the country from BAME groups, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement. I think we get someone else there. There's another notice asking us to conclude and invite the next speaker. So
thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. That was really interesting, and it'd be good to hear the outcome of your workshop in a couple of days' time. So, can we hand to the next speaker, please?
Thank you. So I'm Geeta Menon, and I'm a consultant ophthalmic surgeon by background, and postgraduate dean in South London, and clinical director for the Clinical Research Network in Kent, Surrey, and Sussex. And I'm going to talk about the leadership and excellence. Can I have my slides, please? Yeah, go to the next slide, please. So what's the issue? I think the majority of leadership positions Sunil just pointed out, not just in the chair positions, but in other areas, we're also from more white than rather ethnic minorities, and similar disparities exist in leadership roles and in clinical excellence awards. So going on to the next slide, please. So why is this important? I think it's important because the NHS was founded on the principle that every person should be treated fairly, equally, and free from discrimination. We need to have better performance and culture of an organization. Widening the leadership talent pool is really important, and this also helps deliver better standard of care to the patients. Next slide, please. So what does the data show? So if you look at the leadership roles, again, like Sunil was pointing out, you have significant underrepresentation from band 8A onwards. So very senior managers, if you look at 6.5% in data showed in 2019. And this increased slightly. So it was 5.4% in 2016 and then went up to 6.5%. Again, similarly, if you look at the board members from BAME background, this was 7.4% in 2018 and has gone up to 8.4. So it's still a long journey. And however, the increase in your BAME staff has actually gone up quite significantly if you look at the data. Next slide, please. We heard from Professor Dame Jane Dacre yesterday about the gender and the impact of that on leadership roles as well. And again, if you look at the NHS boards with women, it's only 42% compared. And if you look at all the NHS boards, 209 NHS trust boards do not demonstrate gender equality even at the present. Next slide, please. And again, if you look at Clinical Excellence Awards, I mean, in 2018, only 22% of BAME staff actually applied for these awards, and only 16% actually were successful. And in fact, that is going backwards, this data, because it's lower than what it was in 2014. Next slide, please. So what is the issue here? If we look at it to conclude, actually, if you look at it, no NHS trust has actually achieved equality in offering genuine level of playing field for all its employees to achieve its potential. So it's a long journey. We need to start somewhere. And I think that this is a great initiative that we've taken on. We are holding a workshop to actually look at some of the solutions that we were discussing just now. And probably the way forward is to actually try and get not just the cultural transformation, but also have that benchmarking there to push organizations to get to where they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. I think we have time for questions, do we, Alfred? So we'll go ahead with some questions because we've not been told to stop. We've got a couple of comments which people can read in the margins there. In terms of questions, I'm just looking in there. Somebody's made an interesting comment about, sorry, they're moving quite quickly, a comment about the colleges contacting BAPIO to discuss the vice president, improving diversity in the vice president roles. I can't see another question there. There's several really, really good, wise comments there. So, Geeta, just to sort of come and ask you a question, if I can yourself, you talked about sort of how you would actually increase board representation, committee representation, etc. And that actually, out of this process, we want some meetings. And we talked about Athena Swan. Are you sort of thinking that there may be ways to link those solutions in that way?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. The plan is to actually come up with a benchmarking tool that is similar to the Athena Swan, but having some of the, more about the talent spotting, the talent pool, etc. And I say this because, I'm an example of how that worked, because I was somebody who started off.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be part of this very thought-provoking session today. And if I could have the slides, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a great presentation there. And I think what we're going to do, what we're going to do now is to invite the other two speakers, and so Sunil and Geeta, could they come and...
Can I?
Yes, Geeta, good. Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Geeta. Yeah.
No, I agree with Geeta. This is just a start of journey, and there are 70 odd colleagues across the country working together on this trend. And I really hope that the journey continues and we build up.
Are at various stages of progression, towards equality, and they're not at the same stage. Even the understanding is not similar. So I think there is a lot of hard work cut out for us. I don't think we essentially know yet, because we're just in the beginning of the journey, as to what we need to focus on. And I think the work is we set ourselves for the rest of the year, if not way longer, is to try and sort of gather as much information as we can and get some buy-in from the stakeholders involved, which would include people like the Royal Colleges and the General Medical Council, and so kind of work on more kind of systems change. Really, we are, as everyone has spoken before, there's not much use in knowing. I mean, of course, data is important, but we've got known things for a long time, and I think it's about, it's about kind of how we can action it. But I will let the other experts chip in over here.
One of the things I wanted to say is that apart from the work that's going on, to collate the evidence, to have that robust data, and to come up with solutions and implementation plans, what I think the role of BAPIO is also very important. We've talked about how pernicious a sense of alienation can be, an isolation or lack of belonging. And I think what networks like BAPIO can do is firstly gather people together to have that collective voice. There is strength in that collective voice. There is strength in fostering that sense of belonging. There is strength in fostering that sense of belonging and the network. And also, I think, the sponsoring and
reading all the scoping documents as well. What's your thoughts, actually? What should BAPIO do, or what should, we should all collectively do?
Well, no, that's a really interesting question. So I wouldn't want to have the answer, but I can share a few thoughts. I think, the comments that colleagues have just made sort of sum it up to me, really. There's a lot of data now. You've heard all the data in education, and you shared the research statistics. Geeta talked about, leadership in trust, and we know about differential attainment. So there's a lot of data. And I would say, moving away from sort of projects that demonstrate the data to actually these pieces of work that actually tackle the systemic issues, and working with the organisations with, like you said, an implementation plan to actually get these things that we know now, to move away from projects into embedding a more inclusive culture, and celebrating the diversity in our medical workforces. And, Athena Swan, the inspiration was linking it to the funding. And I still remember, as a sort of, however many years it was, 10 years ago, when Sally was thinking that was brilliant, tying it to BRC funding, inspiration. Because then everybody took notice and listened, because they had to. That model's been run now, hasn't it, and been very successful. So, but I think, it's working with organisations across the big system in the NHS to tackle these. I'm not supposed to have the answers, but I think you've all discussed the answers, and it's good to share that in that discussion. It was a really interesting session. Thank you. Great speech, great talks from everyone. look forward to hearing more about. Thank you. I think we've signed off now, I think.
Yeah, it's always good to finish a few minutes early. So no, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. That's good.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Here we are to announce the winners today. We have Professor Geeta Menon and Dr. Sunil Daga with us. Dr. Mehta and Dr. Bamra, could you please raise your hand so we could let you on stage? Yes, they'll be here in a few seconds. Welcome, Dr. Mehta. Welcome, Dr. Bamra.
Hello.
Over to you, Dr. Daga.
Yeah. I'll just welcome you all for this research winners for the prize distribution ceremony, and we're very privileged to have all our dignitaries on this dais. So I would like to hand over to Dr. Sunil Daga, who is one of a consultant in the nephrologist at Leeds Hospital, and he's also honorary chair for the BAPIO, Institute for Health Research. So over to you, Dr. Sunil.
I think JS will kill me. I'm honorary chair for BAPIO Institute for Health Research, so I don't have privilege like JS. But thank you. Welcome all. So this session is brief, and we're going to talk about the winners. And I just will take a couple of minutes. It's been a long journey for both the presenters and the team from BAPIO East Midlands. We started off with 120 entries. We had scoring team of over a dozen people and so many judges. I cannot name. If I name, the session will be over. So thank you for all the hard work, in their own time, and also the presenters who really worked very hard. Raju, could you bring up the slides on for me? So what we're going to do is we will go through the awards. The trophies are real, but at the moment they are a virtual photo. The BAPIO office will send them to their address. So Rajiv, yeah. I'm just waiting for the presentation to come on. So while that is happening, the four presenters in oral presentation, please do keep your hands up. You all are going to get a prize, but we will announce your name. Is it possible?
Yes.
Thank you, Mason. Sorry, Geeta, you're mute, so we can't hear if you're talking.
No, I just said Mason is doing it.
Thank you. So while that's happening, I don't need to really do any introduction of Dr. Mehta, who's a real role model, a very inspiration, young. I think he says he's 18-year-old BAPIO president, and obviously Professor Bamra, who is again very inspirational and very infectious in terms of getting job done. Anytime he will be next to on the phone. So. Thank you both to provide that inspirational leadership. So I'm just waiting like all of you. So I will announce the name for the nurses and allied healthcare professional poster category awards. So next slide, please. The second, so both the prize have been taken.
The third prize goes to Lindsay Woolhoff. And again, she is a physiotherapist from the University of Nottingham. Congratulations, Lindsay.
My apologies. That is University Hospital Leicester. Sorry, Professor Menon, I missed out.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that it was Leicester. Sorry. Yeah. So are they coming onto the stage? I thought they were.
And running perfectly to the time. So what a role model you've been. Fantastic work. Congratulations. So is the first prize winner still there?
She's left, I think.
Okay. So we will catch up, and as Sunil said, the trophies will be sent to your postal address. Those who are getting cash prizes, they can have a party. If you wish, you can invite us. Happy to join. But the monies will be transferred to your account. We will keep in touch with you to see how you would like to receive the prizes. Thank you very much, and congratulations again.
Congratulations. Thank you all. With that, this session comes to an end. Thank you again for staying back, and we hope to see you next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, everybody.